It started one quiet Saturday morning. I was sipping my coffee, enjoying the view of my front yard, when a silver SUV rolled up and parked right in front of my driveway. Out stepped Karen, our self-proclaimed HOA queen. Clipboard in hand, sunglasses on, walking like she owned the entire street. "Good morning," she said with that fake sweet tone she always used before dropping bad news. "We need to discuss your property lines. It seems part of your backyard extends onto HOA-maintained land." I stared at her for a second, trying not to laugh. "Karen, my house was surveyed before I moved in. Everything's on record with the city." But she shook her head confidently. "Oh, I've reviewed the HOA's map myself. You'll need to remove your back fence and clear the garden area. Technically, that's community property." "Community property? Seriously?" I looked at the piece of paper she was holding. It was literally a blurry screenshot from Google Maps with a red marker, line drawn through it. "Karen," I said, trying to stay calm, "this isn't even an official document." She crossed her arms. "Until this is resolved, you're technically encroaching on HOA land. There may be fines involved." I just smiled and told her, "We'll see about that." That same afternoon, I went straight to the city zoning office. They were kind enough to pull up the original survey map, stamped and signed. And guess what? My property was completely within legal boundaries. Not a single inch crossed HOA land. A week later, I showed Karen the documents. Instead of apologizing, she doubled down. "Well, maybe the HOA's internal map overrides the city's. I'll have to check with our surveyor." That's when I realized she wasn't just mistaken. She was obsessed with control. So I decided to play her game, but by the book. I started collecting every record I could. Photos, coordinates, old deeds, even drone shots of my fence. I wasn't going to let her harass me into tearing down my yard. Karen thought she could intimidate me with made-up HOA rules. But she had no idea that her little property claim stunt would end up costing her 6 months' worth of rent, paid directly to me. And the best part? She'd have no one to blame but herself. A week after showing Karen the official documents, I thought things would finally calm down. But oh no, Karen doesn't back off that easily. One morning, I came home from work and noticed yellow tape tied to my mailbox. On my front door was a notice stamped HOA violation, unauthorized occupancy. I actually laughed out loud. She had reported me to the HOA board for illegally occupying community property. That was her next move. At the next HOA meeting, I showed up early, papers in hand. Karen was already there, sitting like she was presiding over a courtroom. "We have serious matters to discuss," she began. "This homeowner has been using HOA land without permission." I stood up. "Actually, that's not true," I said calmly. "The city's records prove this is my property." She smirked. "The HOA operates under its own community boundaries. If your house overlaps, you technically owe rent for that section." That line hit me like lightning. Rent? She was now saying I owed her rent for living in my own house. I could hear a couple of neighbors whispering, clearly realizing how ridiculous she sounded. So I decided right then and there, if she wanted to play with fake rules, I'd use her own logic against her. I hired a certified land surveyor. The guy came out with all his professional gear, laser scanners, tripods, the works. 2 days later, I had a thick folder with an official survey report that proved something very interesting. My property didn't cross HOA land at all, but Karen's did. Yep, part of her fancy flower bed and fence extended 3 feet onto my land. The next HOA meeting was priceless. I walked in, handed copies of the survey to everyone, and said, according to HOA standards, anyone using another homeowner's land owes rent. So, Karen, looks like you've been living on my property. The room went silent. Karen's mouth fell open. "That's ridiculous," she shouted. I shrugged. "You made the rule, not me." Everyone in the room started laughing quietly. Even the board chair tried not to smile. From that moment, Karen's authority started to crack. The neighbors saw her for what she was, a bully who finally got trapped in her own nonsense. And the best part? The board decided to review her own policy. By the end of the meeting, Karen was officially asked to pay me rent for 6 whole months. The irony was delicious. Karen thought I was bluffing when I told her she owed me rent. She laughed right in my face and said, "You can't be serious. No one's going to make me pay for a few feet of dirt." But guess what? The HOA board was tired of her nonsense. They didn't want to admit it publicly, but Karen had caused problems for almost everyone on our street. Citations for trash bins, barking dogs, even mailbox paint color. This time, I had given them the perfect chance to make her follow her own rules. 2 days later, the HOA issued an official notice. Homeowner Karen Smith is required to pay a monthly land use fee to compensate for unauthorized occupation of neighboring property, per her own submitted clause. When I read that, I nearly spit out my coffee. It was real. They actually made her pay. The first payment was due that Friday. And sure enough, I received an envelope in my mailbox, hand-delivered. Inside was a check for $312, signed by Karen Smith. I couldn't help but grin. I saw her later that day while I was watering my lawn. She glared at me like she'd swallowed a lemon. "Don't think this means you've won," she snapped. I smiled. "Karen, you literally just paid rent to me." The look on her face was priceless. She turned bright red, muttered something under her breath, and stormed off. For the next 6 months, like clockwork, I got a check from her every month. Same amount, same envelope. I even started calling her my favorite tenant. My buddies in the neighborhood joked that I should start listing her as a source of passive income. But as funny as it was, there was something deeper going on. Karen's grip over the HOA was breaking. People stopped listening to her lectures. And whenever she brought up a new rule, someone would ask, "Is this another one of your rent policies?" Eventually, the laughter spread. She couldn't handle being the punchline anymore. By the time her 6th and final payment came in, Karen could barely make eye contact with anyone on the block. She looked defeated. I almost felt bad for her, almost. But I'll admit, cashing those 6 checks felt amazing. She wanted to use the HOA to control everyone. Instead, she ended up paying rent for land that was never hers to begin with. And I wasn't done yet, because the final lesson I taught her would end her HOA reign for good. By the time the 6th rent check arrived, Karen was a completely different person. The woman who used to patrol the neighborhood like a sheriff now avoided eye contact with everyone. She barely showed up to HOA meetings anymore. And when she did, she sat in the back quietly, pretending to take notes. Honestly, I thought she'd finally learned her lesson. But a few weeks later, she proved me wrong. Again. One morning, I stepped outside and found another notice taped to my garage door. Driveway violation, non-compliant surface design. It was signed, of course, by Karen. I laughed so hard my neighbor across the street asked what was going on. I told him, apparently my concrete driveway is too modern for her taste. That was it. I decided it was time to end this whole feud once and for all. I gathered every HOA member and called for a formal review meeting. This time I didn't come empty-handed. I brought every piece of evidence, her fake property claim, the rent notices, the complaint letters, everything. When the meeting began, Karen tried to act professional. "I'm just ensuring everyone follows community standards," she said. But the chairwoman interrupted her. "Karen, this is the 5th time you've targeted the same homeowner without valid cause. This behavior is harassment." Then I stood up. "And I'd like to make a motion to have Karen removed from her HOA position, effective immediately." The room went quiet. You could feel the tension in the air. Then one by one, hands went up. Every member voted yes. Karen's face turned pale. "You can't do this!" she shouted. "I am the HOA!" The chairwoman leaned forward. "No, Karen, you were..." She stormed out of that room, like a thunderstorm, slamming the door so hard that a few papers fell off the table. That was the last time I ever saw her in an HOA meeting. After that, things actually got better around here. The new HOA team focused on real improvements, fixing streetlights, repainting mailboxes, organizing community picnics. For once, it felt like a neighborhood again, not a dictatorship. A few months later, I received a letter from Karen's lawyer. She wanted to settle privately if I agreed to remove all written proof of the rent payments. I never replied. Instead, I framed one of her rent checks and hung it in my garage, right above my lawnmower. A daily reminder that sometimes standing your ground pays, literally. Because when Karen tried to steal my land, she ended up paying rent for it instead.